Welcome to Chasing the Beats, a show dedicated to weeklybeats.com artists, their songs, and stories from the 2024 season. I'm your host, SQF, and our guest today is Levelcapybara. Welcome to Levelcapybara, which is a very interesting name.
Thanks. Happy to be here. And yeah.
I guess we'll kick it off with kind of the standard questions of, was this your first Weekly Beats?
Actually, so this one was my fourth.
Oh, okay.
I got started in back in 2018. A friend of mine and another Weekly Beater who goes by Snyderman has also been participating this year. They let me know that Weekly Beats was a thing, and so 2018 I gave it a shot. Didn't quite do every week back then, but I still enjoyed it a lot, and managed to come back for 2020, 2022, and this past year.
Awesome. And what was your music making prior to 2018?
Prior to that, I guess I was still trying to kind of get familiar with the tools and get off the ground a bit. I started in college, I guess. I just, when I was trying to figure out what direction to run in or what I was going to do, I found myself more and more just kind of like spending time in at this piano we had in our dorm room. Luckily, nobody shooed me away, so I got to practice a little bit. Yeah, and just that kind of got me curious about composing, which led me to the music department, and I was lucky to meet some really great professors there who taught me so much. And yeah, pretty much started kind of building from there.
So you went kind of the music career direction?
Not really as a career, ultimately. Like, my day job is definitely like much different, but I wound up learning kind of a lot along the way that like really sort of fed into the way that I think about like composing tracks now.
Got it. So I take it you're a piano player?
Kind of. Not much of one, but I do use the keyboard like primarily when I'm trying to come up with ideas.
Okay. So you at least know your way around.
Yeah. And when I'm out and about, I carry a ukulele and an ocarina with me sometimes.
All right.
I like to tell people I'm a vuvuzela player because they were handing those out in college. So I got plenty proficient in that. They were subsequently banned for like noise complaints, but oh well.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So you started out in college kind of learning from professors and like not necessarily going the music career direction, but absorbing from some music professionals, if you will. And
yeah.
I guess taking some classes in college.
Yeah, definitely. And I was kind of probably behind the curve on a lot of the knowledge that I should have had, but people were very patient and were doing really interesting things that I just wanted to kind of explore. One of my professors was really into the electronic music scene and specifically like algorithmic composition. So for a period of time, I was starting to learn how to use a super collider to create kind of like generative music.
Cool.
Or at least music with like generative elements, kind of deciding here's what I'm going to control, but here are moments where I'm going to set parameters instead and kind of play with kind of letting the algorithm like see what it wants to do.
Got it. So do you still do a lot of that kind of music making?
Not really. Everything these days is kind of straight in the DAW, and pretty much working with MIDI and kind of being more on point, I guess, with like the choices I'm trying to make. But I mean, that taught me a lot about sort of how to think about like song structure and things like that.
And so in 2018, you were like, I want to join this weekly beats thing. What sort of sparked your interest at that point in time?
That was kind of right around the time that I'd been out of college for a little bit and was trying to find sort of that sense of community again. Like being in school, when you're kind of like in classes with people, you sort of have that network already and people you
Right.
can turn to nerd out about music. It's harder to kind of build that back up when everyone kind of runs off in different directions. But I met my friend Snyderman again. We're through a music meetup we're both a part of, and he sort of taught me a lot about like the local music scene, and drew my attention to weekly beats, and it just I decided I'd give it a shot. Wasn't sure how far I'd make it, but I mean, just kind of the challenge of the community really kept me coming back.
Yeah, I mean, that's not an element that I really expected to kind of keep me going, but it's turned out to be maybe the biggest element of weekly beats, that a community I didn't know I needed, that really has been very welcoming and super supportive. So
Yeah, no, it's been amazing seeing kind of people with all these different skills and disciplines coming together and just like making such cool stuff each week, but also kind of just digging into what other people are doing too, and sort of that exchange.
yeah.
That's been amazing. Like, and the encouragement like along the way.
Yeah, because without the community, and I've mentioned this before in other episodes, it's like you're trying to get people to listen to your stuff, but it's maybe not the right audience. But with so many people participating in weekly beats, there's always someone that will kind of latch on to what you're making and appreciate what you're doing, which is nice.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. Like during the off seasons, I'll like maybe post music on SoundCloud, and maybe like one or two people might hear it. Not totally sure, but like during the weekly beats years, like we're all there for kind of that purpose because we're all kind of hungry for music making and for
Yeah.
listening to cool stuff. And so, like, immediately there's kind of a flood of feedback, like either positive or like constructive. And it's all, I mean, it's really rewarding by comparison.
Yeah, I think only robots listen to my SoundCloud, so
Oh, yeah.
or spam bots,
The spam bots. Yeah. Oh, geez.
Yeah, so and I was reading a thing. I talked with in another episode about this as well. I was reading a thing that just how much music gets put on Spotify that only has like 1 to 5 listens, and it's like 80% of the music that gets put on Spotify. So there's just like a huge amount of people creating without that community audience. And so it's just really nice to have the weekly beats people to support us.
Yeah. No, for sure. I do think like it's been a really special audience to get to write for and to get to listen from. Like I think out of any project or any like group I've gotten to like do musical things for, that this has definitely been like the most rewarding.
Yeah. Did you now after 4 years, how did you kind of approach the fourth year versus the other years?
I think the other years kind of prepared me for what to expect in terms of sort of how quick the turnaround has to be sometimes,
Yeah.
and also how to kind of plan ahead, like to think about when you're probably going to be like more strapped for time and how to kind of compensate for that. This year, at a certain point, I thought, okay, I've kind of been doing this for a bit. What if I tried doing something like to amp up the challenge. And I took a look at some of the like little kind of fictitious blurbs I was writing in the track descriptions for my tracks, and I started thinking, well, you've wanted to get into soundtrack work for a bit. What if you tried treating this as like a year-long soundtrack making process, and what if you sort of came up with a fake story to go along with it?
Got it.
So that did not last. I wound up abandoning that idea sort of partway through the year. But for the first part of it, it really got me kind of thinking more along the lines of how do we tie things together, like thematically as we're going.
Like a cohesive theme or story along the way.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Exactly like
Yeah,
that.
what caused you to kind of abandon that mission?
Burnout, probably. Which it's just like that. And burnout, like, I feel like that's just part of the weekly beat experience. Like, at a certain point during the year or several points, there's moments where we're just like, okay, I think I need to kind of ease up a bit on what I'm trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, you definitely have to balance the output with your own expectations and new elements that you're trying to add in that may complicate it and delay it.
Yeah. Plus, I'd feel like I sort of came up with sounds that I was really excited to work with at the beginning and at the end of the year. But during the middle of the year, I was just getting cravings for like different types of arrangement or just kind of things that weren't going to fit into the mold of what I was doing before.
Got it.
It's like sometimes I feel like as the seasons change or as the weather changes, I
Oh,
feel
for
like I start
sure.
wanting to write differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got one song, Summer Ends, uh, that every time I listen to these sort of like seasonal changes of weekly beats, I'm sort of like taken back to like, that time and, wishing it was maybe still summer right now, of course. So it definitely
Yeah.
ends up being a journal, not only just of my music, but everyone else's.
Yeah. I have been hearing kind of people describing weekly beats in sort of a journalistic sense, and like I I mean that's a great way of putting it. I feel like it's kind of like you go back and kind of like how different smells can or like sights can remind you of like different moments in time. Just
Hmm.
getting back and listening to these tracks and sort of reading the comments and stuff brings back pretty like vivid memories of what was going on at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, your tastes change as the seasons change and you kind of gravitate towards different sounds and maybe the stuff that you're coming up with, you're like, I don't want to limit what I'm creating by, even if it's a fun challenge, like the
Mm.
challenge isn't really serving me in this moment.
Yeah, pretty much. There was actually in a previous year, should give a shout out to Judgment Act for coming up with a challenge that split the difference pretty well.
Okay.
It was, I think, hashtag weekly seasons, with the idea being that like there were 4 weeks spread out throughout the year, one being designated to spring, one to summer, fall and winter, and by the end of it, you would have like a suite of tracks for like one per season. So that was actually pretty fun. It was kind of a nice way to say, hey, here's the point in time we're at in the year. Like going to try to write according to the mood I'm in now.
Yeah. Like a hit of the summer, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, pretty. I mean, well, certainly something of the summer. But I'd like to try to write a hit. We'll see.
Yeah. Aren't we all? And so you mentioned a DAW. Is that your primary music production arena?
Yeah, so I work in Logic and pretty much mostly wind up working in MIDI. So
So you're sequencing MIDI in Logic, and I
Yeah.
know in other episodes there's been mention of the Logic session players. Do you ever use those?
I don't believe so. I think I wind up like the closest probably coming to that was back when I was transitioning from Super Collider to Logic. There would be points where I would just kind of see how something might sound, like program Super Collider to send certain patterns by MIDI signal into Logic and then record that.
Got it.
But I mean, these days it's pretty much it's kind of a lot more hands-on. So
Yeah. And I would say you have really great sound design, and it's kind of varied over the year. Um, like there's a lot of video game kind of music, but not necessarily like chip tune. But then also these like lush pads and reverb and like boards of Canada kind of style stuff. How do you go about doing your sound design?
uh, well, first off, thanks, and second, I that's a good question because it kind of varies. Sometimes I'll just be sort of to get inspiration, flipping through whatever sounds or presets I kind of have on hand in Logic. I tend to default to Alchemy a lot, or to plugin called Korg Legacy Collection M1, which has kind of a bunch of Korg presets. And I'll start thinking about, oh, this might sound really nice, but what can I kind of do to like change the sound? Like if I basically tighten, this, or like sort of put this through this effect, like what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the further away I feel like I'm able to, if I'm successful at getting away from what I'm kind of expecting it to sound like, usually that's when I start getting like more interested and more capable of actually like getting inspired idea wise, I guess.
Got it. So it's like you're chasing a certain sound maybe by changing some parameters, but then you hit a point where you're surprised by the direction the sound took, and then you're like, "Oh, this is actually cooler than what I thought I was going to come up with."
Yeah. Or I guess like just kind of experimenting just to see whether anything strikes out and like catches interest. And once it does, trying to kind of hone in on that and seeing, okay, what's going to complement that? What can we kind of put together with it?
Yeah. So like the element of surprise and mixed with like excitement to go like make something with that thing.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Exactly.
And you don't use any outboard gear or anything.
Really, not very much. Like, I do have a MIDI controller I'll use to kind of like definitely getting to kind of actually play things in, even if that's not in the final product necessarily always.
Mhm.
Definitely helps for like generating ideas or kind of breaking free of kind of like the limit of just drawing in or like keying in MIDI with the computer keyboard.
Yeah.
And sometimes like even just like stepping away and kind of like if I'm out on a hike, like just trying to sort of use like whatever instrument I can actually like lug along with me to like
Mhm.
start coming up with ideas that I can take and put in the DAW later. Stuff like
Yeah.
that.
I definitely, cuz I primarily use the M8, but I a lot of times will hook up a MIDI controller and just, record some notes in, like you said, even if it's not like the final form. Like I can still, the beauty of MIDI is I can go in and like nudge some notes around or remove notes or just delete a section of it and
Mm.
come back and sort of noodle again. But I feel like different things come out versus just like programming notes in kind of like a spreadsheet versus, kind of building melodies on a keyboard.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. Kind of like the process sort of changes the output, kind of, or inspires
Exactly.
you to think in different ways, maybe.
Yeah, because I feel like with whatever tool, you kind of get in this same rut or rhythm where you're maybe making the same things. So anything you can do, whether it's a new sound or a different way of inputting notes, because I'm not a keyboard player. I'm a button masher. But I definitely can hear when notes don't shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does change the output. Just different things happen, which I think is the whole joy of making music, is just being surprised.
Yeah. And like, that's probably like, when I think about it, like, I guess one of the like biggest things that like maybe we're all trying to practice when we're kind of going into weekly beats is how to keep surprising ourselves throughout the year, maybe like sort of
Yeah.
finding ways to kind of stay excited to keep like pushing into territory we don't know.
Yeah, because you're definitely fighting, like you mentioned earlier, this like burnout feeling of
Mm-hmm.
like, and also, why am I feeling this burnout feeling towards something that should actually be fun? So like, I definitely rode these waves throughout the year of, why am I feeling this like pressure to create something? And then every time I just went in and was like, just experiment and have fun, like things came out.
Yeah. And I mean, pretty much exactly that. And going back to what you were saying, we've been saying about the like how awesome the community here. For as much of the year as I wind up feeling like, oh gosh, if I, start doing this or if I change direction here, is that going to resonate with people? Tend to respond to that really well.
Yeah.
No one is ever like, oh, what are you doing this? You shouldn't have done that. Go back to what you were doing here. It's more like people are like, oh wow, you did this. That's pretty interesting, unexpected, but pretty that's awesome to hear, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I guess we all sort of run on surprise. So whenever someone else changes up something, or kind of goes out on a limb and tries something new, like we all understand what that takes to bust out of your box and try something maybe weird or new.
Yeah,
And so everyone else kind of rewards that, which is nice.
yeah, for sure.
Another plus for the community.
Yeah.
All right, I'm checking my notes here. Yeah, because I was reading in the No Disc, which is one of my picks, where you were kind of going through that challenge that you made for the year and kind of listing here, even though I didn't, or I abandoned that challenge, here's kind of some things that I learned about my music making and abandoning that challenge, and maybe how that's a good thing. So,
Mm.
like, I'm just gonna read through a couple of those because I think that they're really interesting. So, like, the first one is, don't commit to a year long goal without a year long plan mapped out in advance. I mean, it's kind of hard to plan weekly beats, or it's one of those things where you think you can plan it, but then once you get into it, you're like, no, nothing. There's things out of my control, which I think is what led to burnout for me. Is like, if I thought a certain song was going to go a certain way every week, when it took a different direction and I tried to kind of control it in the original direction, that's when I felt the most stressed out. or anxious about being able to finish it. But as soon as I was like, hey, let's just experiment in this direction, good things happened.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And I probably would reword the way that I phrased that now, but I think at the time I was thinking like just even like obviously nothing ever really goes according to plan. And kind of being flexible is definitely part of it. I think uh I was sort of responding to the situations I was running into where certain tracks, like even if I knew generally that I had a goal for tying everything together by the end of the year, there were moments where I was like, oh, I don't have a plan for kind of what comes next, sort of right
Mm-hmm.
now in the short term. And like the fewer of those, if I were to try this again, the fewer of those decisions I leave to myself for the last minute, maybe the better. Like even if I end
Right.
up switching gears, just having something to fall back on, like probably ahead of time in terms of direction, maybe would be something I'd try kind of thinking of ahead of time.
Yeah, or like with your story based goal, it's sort of like leaving the art up to the observer,
Mhm.
because I feel like your songs kind of have a story, or at least I can make up a story that would fit in with, your previous narrative without you even having to do anything.
Yeah, no,
It's
true
like when
enough.
you ask a painter, like, what does this mean? And they're like, I don't know, it means whatever it means to you because you're the one looking at it. Like, it's
Yeah.
it's for you to interpret how you want.
Yeah, that is a fair point, and it kind of reflects times where, like, you'll write a track and you have a certain idea of what the inspirations were, what kind of an image it's or like emotion or scene it's supposed to accompany, and then you'll read the comments and people will be like, "Oh, this is awesome! It makes me think of this and this and
Yeah.
this," and you're like, "I that's awesome! I had no clue. I wasn't even thinking of that before." But then
Right.
it's like, oh, but now that I think about it, like that's an even cooler way of looking at it.
Yeah, so it's a little less pressure on the creator to be like, I'm just making this thing. Like, a lot of it's for me, but people are free to sort of interpret it and like build their own story around it, which, like, the human brain is great in making up our own stories.
Yeah. And like getting to kind of come together and hear how people are interpreting, what we're
Yeah,
making. I feel like that's also like another really cool part of this exercise that kind of brings the whole community together.
for sure. And even kind of back to the output expectations, or input versus output. Like, tons of people are like, this is just like a speed trash week where I just like cranked out this thing. And it's amazing to read the comments and be like, this is like one of my favorite ones of you. Like, so like, what does that say about how long you, or like what you put into something and the output and those connections, and how we make up our own stories about like, oh, the more time I put into this thing, the better it's going to be, which, you just shit something out one week and people are like, wow, that was amazing.
Yeah.
So you're
No,
like, oh, maybe
exactly.
I don't need to spend as much time, or maybe I'm second guessing myself and that's what's taking so long.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes into your second point, which is, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Mm. And that's just something I feel like I've been trying to sort of learn ongoingly in music and kind of a bunch of aspects in life, but just
Yeah.
being less afraid of, kind of making something and then realizing, oh, shoot, this could have been better because maybe, because of that, the next thing will be better. Or,
Yeah.
you learn a lot along the way. You just have to give yourself permission to kind of be a student and be willing to kind of make mistakes and kind of figure out sort of how to improve from that.
Yeah. And your third one is sometimes it's more productive to do things out of order. Follow your heart, not your outline, which is like 100% true. Because especially making things on the M8, which I feel like is kind of like a visual thing, like I would just experiment and make sections, and a lot of times the song order and ends up changing of like, actually I think I like this section is better first, and I thought it was going to be sort of like a middle chorus or bridge or something. So another expectation versus reality surprise moment, and value of being a little sloppy, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's actually a really interesting point. The idea, like, it almost sounds like you're describing sort of as you're kind of putting things together, the structure that you thought you had in mind sort of actually changes, or like
Yeah,
things come together in a different way that you were thinking.
yeah. Because like for me, the act of just like getting things out is like the main first exercise, and then like usually if I was like, all right, I'm kind of running low on time, I was like, I need to just start arranging parts. Like, and I knew or learned over the year as soon as I started arranging things, like things really started to come together. And then I'd be like, okay, these two parts don't quite match up. What do I need to fit them together? Or maybe let's see if we just switch the order, maybe they work. And it's like, whoa, actually, I like that better.
Mm. Yeah.
And then your fourth one is don't fight your mood, write your mood, which I feel like maybe I write the opposite of my mood. Like
Oh,
because I'll maybe be sort of like sad or angry, and I try to write something like that, and then it ends up like being kind of like a happy sounding song, and I'm like,
yeah.
maybe I'm like trying to talk myself out of my mood, or maybe it's a coping mechanism, or I don't know, but it's kind of interesting.
That is interesting. Sometimes maybe it's just hard with a lot of the kind of harder emotions. Like I run into that same rut too. I feel like part of the reason I was pushing for a heavier sound with a lot of my tracks this year was specifically because I feel like I try to write something a bit like sadder or more aggressive sounding, and it winds up turning out like a little too upbeat or soft. So I just wanted to try and break out of that. But
Yeah.
but yeah.
And then your final one is most importantly, Weekly Beats isn't just a year long challenge, it's a year long journal, which, boom, like so much a journal. It's crazy. I know that's another thing that I just didn't expect going into it, of like how much a song can just transport you back over a year, like on a week to week basis.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a huge library spanning like when I'm trying to think of like how far back this goes, like 2012 or. And just you think about the fact that this year alone, like every week, I think it never got lower than like 150 artists
Yeah.
submitting 1 minute of
Yeah.
music like each week. And just the sheer volume of not just like how much content got put out on the site, but how many stories are like behind all of that.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
it's really incredible.
Yeah, just I think like 11,000 something songs
Oh,
this
jeez.
past year.
Wow.
And then you think about all the other years, like that's just a shit ton of music. And I don't know if you listened to the Ked Break episode,
Oh, yeah.
where he talks about him doing a weekly beat since like February or March of 2022.
Mhm.
Like, and for him, it's a journal. and that's just insane to keep that output up without always having the community.
Oh yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, no, it really is.
Well, should we get into the music?
That sounds good.
All right. So the first one, which is actually your first song of Weekly Beats 2024, is Cloud Pop. So we'll play that and come back. All right, so that was Cloud Pop, one of your top 3 picks from the year. Why did you pick it?
That was my first submission for 2024, and I think for me it felt like kind of a breakthrough in terms of getting to like a step closer towards that heaviness that I was trying to shoot for. I wanted a stronger sound that packed more of a punch, and so I just tried to put kind of as much as I could into that. Yeah.
Like you wanted to start the year out the gate with like a heavy, hard hitting song.
Yeah. So I definitely tried leaning into like harder percussion, more electric guitar. Just had some fun kind of playing around with things that I would not normally like. There is a ukulele pipe line in there that's run through like a distortion plugin or
Nice.
an amp. And yeah, I just feel like it was I was having fun with a lot of different like kind of textures and stuff.
And is that you on vocals?
So that is actually a Vocaloid part.
All right.
So like I'd definitely rather work with like actual vocalists for most songs. For this one in particular and a few others, I kind of liked the actual like timbre of the Vocaloid part, sort of the synthetic sound of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I made a note and a point to ask you about a lot of the different vocals in your songs because I couldn't tell if it was you just going through some like super heavily processed vocal chain or if it was samples, but they are almost like synth like, but also vocals. You know, it's like almost another synth layer, but you can tell that there's like lyrics that you can't always make out, but it's definitely sounds like a vocal element. So it's like a really cool mix of like synth and vocals, sort of like a different layer that like sets itself apart from the other sounds.
Yeah, so this year in particular, a lot of that was Vocaloid. In other instances, I'd usually like I have actually sung on one or two of my tracks before, but I'd usually prefer to
Okay.
feature like other. I In this instance, a lot of the vocal parts I was writing were not particularly like dynamic melodically or in terms of performance anyway. I guess I was trying to
Yeah.
treat it more like sort of a almost more like a background instrument for
Yeah, a lot of them are like these like steady melodies that just sort of like hold everything together.
yeah, it's more meant to kind of like be textural or to kind of reinforce the
Yeah.
track. But
Some
yeah,
glue.
definitely no match for kind of like some more like dynamic performances that you get with like an actual vocalist.
Yeah, but it's still a really cool choice. Like, because you obviously had a choice of like, okay, I can add another synth or I can add some sort of like vocal sounding melody.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the it and it definitely happened that sort of the timbre of it blended well with like the timbres of certain other like synths and instruments that I was trying to like
Yeah.
play around with at the time. So it just
Yeah.
kind of clicked.
And I mean, that's the freedom of being able to use that kind of vocal instrument is like you can sort of mold the sound into something that works for that particular song, which you can't always do with your own voice.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Like I will take no credit for the vocals, but I got a lot of good experience this year with learning kind of different ways of processing them and different techniques.
Oh,
So
cool. Yeah,
yeah.
that's one thing that I kind of want to challenge myself to next year is one doing more singing, lyric writing, which I have not done, and learn some like more vocal chain processing kind of things. But this song is just like I would say epic sounding is like a good summary of it. Like it's definitely I feel like coming hot out of the gate for week 1. of 2024.
Thanks. The weather around that time really helped with that, actually. I know we talked about kind of like, changes in seasons.
Yeah.
It was, I distinctly remember we were like sort of in between rainstorms, and there were just like days of kind of these huge clouds in a blue sky and just all this really cool light. And the fact that everything was finally like starting to grow back after a dry summer, so things were green
Yeah.
again. Just everything was so shiny and colorful.
Man,
That kind of played into this a lot.
that's cool. And yeah, it transported you back.
Yeah,
All right, the next one is I'll convert the computer name here to Space is for Ducks.
that's exactly it. Good job.
uh, which I love this song, so here we go. All right, that was Spaces for Ducks. How did that make your top three?
Well, around that time of year, I remember there was a
Week 21, by the way, for those
yeah,
listening.
yeah. So around week 21, I want to say in May ish. I just remember coming across a video someone posted of this group of ducks that suddenly was like spellbound, looking at the night sky, watching a meteor shower, and just looking totally bewildered. All these ducks. And I forget how I found that video, but after that, I started seeing a bunch of artists on social media turning it into kind of a meme or a challenge. They just kept drawing that scene over and over again, different artistic interpretations. So this track was inspired by those artists who were inspired by that video, which was inspired by the ducks, which was inspired by the meteor shower. So
Awesome. That
there
is
we
a
go.
great background. Well, there's obviously some intentional duck-like sounds throughout.
Yeah. In Logic, among its built-in samples is a kit for nature noises, either nature comedy or radio or something. And one of those noises might actually be some kind of a horn, but it sounded duck-like enough.
Yeah.
So I just went with that.
Well, it works. It works. And there's kind of a another catchy main melody that sort of like repeats throughout, sort of just like grounding you. Uh Lots of guitar, like guitar solos and stuff in this one. How many do you play guitar?
Not extremely well. I mean, I do play to like sort of come up with ideas.
Okay. So
So
is this
this
MIDI guitar?
this was MIDI guitar.
Okay. Wow. I mean, I would not have guessed that it was MIDI guitar. And then I like the choice to like it continues building, and then for the last like minute and a half, it sort of like drops down, which you think is sort of like a bridge, but then you're just sort of like floating along. I guess maybe the ducks have processed the meteor or are processing what they just saw.
Yeah, I kind of thought of that moment as like, oh, now the ducks they've made it. They're in space with the meteor or something like that.
Got it.
Uh, yeah, but it was fun to get to that point. I was happy with kind of how different like some of the sections in this track actually turned out. That's something I kind of struggle with sometimes.
Yeah. Just like making the sections feel more separated.
Yeah, just more kind of like section to section variety, like
Got
sort
it.
of giving the track a little more like kind of kind of diversity of idea throughout,
Yeah.
which is actually something I was admiring about your tracks.
Oh, thanks, man. I
I
mean, I that was one thing that I was trying hard to, make different sections feel different, but also kind of the like we talked about how I build the tracks and like sometimes the experiments go in drastically different directions and it's like all right, I'm running out of time. Like I've got to tape these two pieces together that may not actually work.
Yeah, that that's definitely a shared feeling. There have been a lot of points where I was like, I don't know if this is really the right direction to move on from this section, but I know I need to go somewhere. And then Sunday rolls around, and I'm like, okay, we're doing this.
Yeah, yeah. Like one week I was like, this is not necessarily like your typical song structure. It's like five songs taped together. Like enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think JWH was like, that was a journey for sure. So yeah, sometimes you got to go on a journey.
Mhm.
All right. Your third pick is Hot Pot. and then in brackets, boss battle. Here we go. All right, that was Hot Pot Boss Battle. How did this make your third slot?
Well, it was definitely like kind of one of the messiest tracks I worked on all year, but also one of the most fun for me to write. Like, I think the start and the end of weekly beats are usually like pretty like not easy writing wise, but more energized just because there's the
Mm-hmm.
excitement of, just starting and the excitement of, oh gosh, we're so close to the finish line now.
Yeah, this is
Uh,
week 50, by the way.
yeah, the weeks leading up to it, it's kind of a roller coaster because it's just so many things happen throughout the year. Your
Mm-hmm.
energy kind of like comes and goes. But this was kind of that point where it was finally getting a lot of motivation back, a little bit of time back, and just suddenly was like pouring like as many different ideas as I could into this track and trying to like kind of fine tune the details.
Cool. I I really like the I guess it's another vocaloid trick that it's another one of those where it's like hard to make out if it's actually a vocal, but it's sort of like this like grungy, like almost percussive element going on.
Yeah, there's definitely some. I tried applying kind of on and off some hard kind of tremolo and effect it, and a lot of distortion. I also pitched it down like about an octave to get it sounding a bit more like guttural, a bit more almost piggish.
Yeah,
It's
that's a good way to put it, piggish.
Yeah, and it is like the character of the speaker in that track. They're not saying a lot, but it's sort of supposed to be just kind of symbolizing sort of a like power hungry, like you know uh king or whatever who like suddenly had that taken away and is just totally you know, uh, not uh, not even sure how to process that. I guess.
Hence the boss battle.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much exactly. Uh,
And I've noticed even just in the songs that we played, there's kind of like a like an arp that you usually start with that sort of like continues throughout the song. Is that kind of like how you begin creating songs, is finding these like sort of repetitive melodies and then building on top?
Sometimes, definitely. Sometimes it's like yeah, trying to find interlocking patterns is one way. Sometimes it's just finding a chord progression I really like. For this song in particular, uh, I think it started with the harmonies because it was actually based on a track from earlier in the year, Scalding Cauldron. Uh,
Okay.
that track went in more of a, like, I guess, deep, soft, almost ambient direction. But originally, I'd had ideas for trying to make it into more of a, like, dance-ish track. And
Okay.
I sort of got curious towards the end of the year, like, what if I revisited that? What would that track have sounded like?
Yeah.
Uh, Turned out a lot grungier than I thought it would at the time, but just yeah,
But you were going in the like just more upbeat direction
yeah,
instead of ambient.
yeah, pretty much.
Cool. Yeah, it's a great song. I can definitely see the boss battle element, especially with that like kind of like you said, piggish lyrics,
Yeah,
vocals.
I yeah, I remember sort of at that time. I think I was finishing up a game called Shin Megami Tensei 5, which is sort of all about sort of summoning and battling demons, and it that the sound for that game in particular like really kind of taught me a lot about like how to create something heavier and sharper,
Cool.
and I think I was trying to apply a lot of those lessons here.
Cool. It worked. Well, we'll head on to my picks. My first one is Root Network. This is from week 5. That was Root Network. One of my picks because that percussion that starts out from the very start, like you're just sort of hooked from the beginning, and you're like, all right, what's gonna happen? And then that vocal sample, or I guess another vocoder or Vocaloid.
So that one was actually not Vocaloid, but it was a sort of a preset in Alchemy. They have a few different vocal options.
Okay. But a really cool, just like soaring vocal line.
Yeah, it's sort of like a choral synth pad kind of thing.
Yeah. And then you do a really cool thing about like 1 minute in where like you've got this awesome drum pattern going, and then you sort of change the drum pattern to almost like halftime and then add in like a higher level synth. And even though not a lot of the other elements have changed, it just feels like a completely different song, completely different section. So I was like, wow, that's a really good reminder that, like, if you're strategic about some little things that you change, like, it can give a whole different feel to a part that most of it is unchanged.
That's a good way of putting it. It's a lesson that I need to kind of commit more to memory, because there were definitely some weeks that I feel like I just, either for lack of time or what, could have paid more attention to. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting how even just very slight changes at the right moment can really kind of dramatically change the flavor of a track.
Yeah, and I think there were some comments on this one that it was like Boards of Canada vibes, which I can definitely see.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year for about Boards of Canada. It's like I hadn't actually. I went from not having heard of the group to suddenly just being wowed by like every track I've heard so far.
Yeah, I
There's
mean it's
there's
ingrained in
amazing
you
stuff.
already.
Yeah, there's
Like,
one.
I was just gonna say, like, I have known about Boards of Canada, but only until the last year or so did I really start like, okay, enough people have told me about this band. I really got to start listening to it. And so when I was reading the comments and listening back in your stuff, I was like, oh, for sure. This is definitely Boards of Canada.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I hope I can kind of keep applying the lessons I'm learning from them now.
Yeah, yeah. And what were you about to say?
Oh, I forget, but you mentioned something earlier about sort of not knowing what direction the track would go in, and I have to admit that I didn't actually know until like a couple of hours before the deadline myself. This was one of those times where I had no clue where I was going, but had already committed to the idea of, okay, I want to try to tie things together thematically. So I really just kind of had to like think, okay, previous weeks, what was I doing in those tracks? What sort of
Yeah.
melodies, what sort of sounds, and like how do I kind of blend those together?
Yeah, because this was still week 5, so you were still on your mission for the year.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, it came out great, and another testament to you don't have to spend a ton of time to make something great.
Mm.
All right, my next one is No Disc. This one just relaxes me every time I listen to it. And I wanted to include it because the other tracks that I picked and the tracks that you picked are definitely, they have percussion. They have these, like, I guess, thematic melodies. But this is just like these lush, reverby pads. Just like you sort of float with the song. I don't know. It's just super relaxing. And I know you were inspired by the loading screen on a GameCube of just like as you put it in the description, like the GameCube itself is taking a break from storytelling, which it feels like at this moment in time you were taking a break from storytelling because this is the where the bullet points we went over earlier. This is the track that you had sort of come to this revelation throughout the year of, all right, this challenge of making this story end to end throughout the year is just not working for me. So, like, you, just like the GameCube, need a break from storytelling.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, on the GameCube side of things, like I have very fond memories of booting up that machine without any disc in it and just listening to this kind of beautiful ambience and sort of just staring at that menu and being like, wow. But yeah, by that point in 2024, I definitely lost the thread of where I thought I wanted to
Yeah.
go with the, and I still had a lot of fun kind of making everything I'd made along the way. But I think I was also just kind of missing the way that weekly beats used to be in previous years for me, where you just had kind of more complete freedom to just write whatever you were
Yeah.
feeling in that current moment. And in that moment, I felt like I just needed like a space kind of similar to the one I had as a kid, like just staring at the menu screen and listening to that music. So I started writing more ambient tracks around that time. And this
Yeah.
was kind of me finally letting go, I guess.
Yeah. I would call this my loading screen music for life. Like, I want to listen to this anytime where I'm like, I just need to, like, relax, like, crank up the stereo, lay down on my bed, and just listen to this because it's just so peaceful.
That's that. Thank you. That means a
So
lot
I
to
was like,
hear.
I really had a hard time picking just 3 tracks, and actually one that you picked was one of my original picks, so I had to go back to the drawing board. The Spaces for Ducks was one of my top picks.
Oh,
Um, so I was like, I gotta include this, like, ambient goodness just to show what you can do, like the breadth of your work. So
thanks.
kudos to that creation.
Well, thank you. Loading screen for life is quite the compliment. If you ever find out where the disk drive for life is, let the rest of us know.
I think we're all looking. We're all looking. I'll let you know.
Yeah.
My final pick is the Bone Punks. This is week 43.
Mm.
And typically, how we do this is we will play out the episode with this song to close it out, but we'll talk about it now.
Okay.
So I picked this one because it's very similar to my first pick, which was Root Network. But this is a kind of like an interesting look at week 5 versus week 43. And I kind of look at this one as Root Network's older, more mature sibling, if you will. Like, they're very similar, but the Bone Punks just feels so much more full. Like, I don't know, just there's so much more grown up about it that I think really captures your evolution throughout the year.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate that. I mean, in terms of like evolution, definitely one of the things I've been mentioning is trying to kind of capture a sound that hits harder. My
Yeah.
my solution in this one was just I really wanted to kind of start getting a little crazier with distortion and seeing how many things I could apply it to.
Yeah.
But then the further I went with that, the more muddy everything got. And I started thinking, okay, well, can I reorganize this so it still feels big, but not cluttered? And
Yeah.
hopefully that worked out to some extent.
No, I mean it hits hard. Like the drums are like super distorted, but also amazing sounding. But there's like it doesn't feel cluttered. I don't know if this is just like mixing or instrument selection, but the track just feels like very spacious and open.
Oh, thanks.
And there's some really cool, I don't know if they're vocals or bells that kind of come in at like the first minute, really cool sounds. I don't know, it just is a really great song. And it's not that Root Network isn't as good, it's just this one is like even better. Like,
Uh,
because if you're starting the year with like trying to make these heavy songs, like you just mentioned, you made a heavy, like super distorted thing where everything still like sounds great and has its place. So mission accomplished.
Thanks, and I'm relieved to hear that it. Uh, I'm relieved to hear it was a step up from kind of where some of my tracks were earlier in the year, as opposed to a step down. We'll see if I can keep going that direction.
Yeah, what do you think you learned from week 5 to 43 that allowed you to make this like a older sibling, if you will?
I think I just learned. That's a really good question. I think I learned how to hear sort of the foreground versus the background a little bit better. I learned sort of where to put things, not just in terms of like parts, but their like frequencies, so that you're organizing things in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think I just also learned like how to reinforce certain components of a track, so it's not just like, oh, it has a bass part or it has the melody, but like how strong can we make it? What kind of flavor can we give it? Things like that.
Yeah, just giving all the individual components a little bit more of their own like personality and life.
Yeah, definitely. I spend a lot of time trying to think about like the arrangement and trying not to just let sounds kind of be left alone, but trying to think of like ways to get myself invested in them again, or like interested, like what combinations of things have I not tried before that hopefully
Yeah.
might turn out interesting.
Yeah, like evolving the sounds along the way, but also like one thing that I learned was kind of taking similar melodies or maybe even the same melody and just like passing them to different instruments. So it's like that element of familiarity, but also kind of some new life hearing it with a different instrument or some different effects or
Mm.
yeah, so that concludes my picks. And I want to thank you again for being on the show. And I want to thank everyone out there listening for listening and leaving such nice comments on YouTube and in the Discord. So it's a pleasure to be doing this and learning more about everyone's weekly beats journey. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to talk with you, and thank you so much for hosting me and for putting all of this together.
Yeah, yeah. It's a different kind of weekly challenge, but I'm getting it figured out. So, well, cool. We will close out the episode, or you can actually listen to the Bone Punks that we just talked about. Enjoy, and see you guys on the next one.